I'm Amber, and I never imagined that I would be the one to break off relations with my family. However, life has a way of revealing people's true selves, particularly at what ought to be the happiest times. 3 years ago, while I was working as an event coordinator at a computer conference, I met James. He was calm, considerate, and very smart, which set him apart from the men I typically dated. Like the rest of my family, I had always been the life of the party, but there was something about his collected manner that appealed to me. I fell in love with him right away because of the way his eyes glowed when he described his projects. He was a senior programmer at a big computer business. My younger sister Rachel would constantly remind me, "You're nothing alike," when we first started dating. He barely says 2 words at family dinners. Despite the fact that she was 5 years younger than me, she constantly seemed to be an expert on relationships. Tom and Linda, our parents, weren't any better. "Honey, are you sure about him?" Every time James left the room, Mom would inquire. "He seems so distant." I made numerous attempts to clarify that James was simply introverted and not distant. He liked serious conversations over small banter and intimate get-togethers over big celebrations. However, my family never made an effort to comprehend. They interpreted his introversion as a personal attack against them and his stillness as conceit. A year ago, James and I were married in spite of their opposition. It was a modest ceremony that we both desired. Although my family was present, they mostly used passive-aggressive remarks to point out how different this wedding was from other family weddings. "I don't understand why they can't accept you for who you are," I said James one evening following yet another unpleasant family meal. He simply shrugged and grinned his soft smile. "Amber, not everyone has to comprehend me, so long as you do." His ability to remain above the drama and not let other people's opinions influence him was what I admired most about him. However, things were going to get a lot worse, and even his composure would be put to the test. It all began last weekend when Mom called. "Next Saturday is our family supper, Amber, my love. But only you. We are aware that James dislikes these get-togethers." My blood pressure started to rise. "What do you mean, just me?" "Well," Mom said hesitantly, her voice dropping off, "you know how James is with crowds, and we're having some relatives around. We believed it would be preferable if—" "Mom, what if?" "If I pretended to be single during family events, and my hubby stayed at home." "I'm sorry, Mom, but my husband will be joining me." "Marriage does not operate that way." My hands trembling with rage, I hung up before she could answer. James simply chuckled when I later told him about it. When Rachel contacted me one bright morning, everything changed. I could almost feel her leaping up and down over the phone, and her voice was brimming with enthusiasm. "Oh my God, Amber, you won't believe it. Last night, Mark proposed," she said. My heart jumped with real delight. I knew how much my sister loved Mark, and I loved her despite our differences. He was a high school teacher who shared Rachel's gregarious nature and enjoyment of social events, and they had been dating for more than 2 years. He appeared like a decent guy. "Rachel, that's incredible." I said, "I'm so happy for you," as I reached for my car keys. "Are you at Mom and Dad's?" "Yes, we're beginning to organize everything, so come on over now." After 20 minutes, I was entering the well-known living room of my parents. Rachel's engagement ring caught the light as she rushed to embrace me. Mark stood close by, looking proud and a little overwhelmed, while Mom and Dad were grinning. "Show me the ring." When I insisted, Rachel proudly showed off the small but exquisite diamond. We talked about dates and looked through wedding publications for the next hour. Then Mom's face became serious. She stated, "The only issue is, well, we're a bit tight on money right now," with an uneasy expression. with Dad's recent medical bills and everything. Despite her best efforts to conceal it, I saw Rachel's face droop a little. I heard myself respond without hesitation, "I'll give you $10,000 for the wedding." Rachel threw herself at me, her embrace almost toppling me. "Oh my God, Amber, thank you, thank you, thank you." Mom and Dad appeared impressed as well. Mom remarked, "That's incredibly generous of you, honey," and for once, she seemed sincere. James and I were eating dinner in our kitchen later that night when I told him everything. I was taken aback by his reaction. "I have an idea," he said, putting down his fork. "What if we also get them tickets to the Maldives for their honeymoon as a surprise gift at the wedding?" I stared at him, dumbfounded. The Maldives? But that would cost about $20,000. "I know," he finished. "I'll use my personal savings. I've been thinking about what you said about building bridges with your family. Maybe this could help them see me differently." I felt tears welling up in my eyes. This was the man my family thought was cold and arrogant, offering to spend his own savings to give my sister her dream honeymoon. "Are you sure?" I asked, still stunned by his generosity. He smiled and pulled me into a hug. "Absolutely. But let's keep it a secret until the wedding. It'll make it more special." That night, as I lay in bed thinking about everything, I felt hopeful for the first time in ages. Maybe this would finally help my family see James for who he really was, not the antisocial person they'd labeled him as, but the incredibly thoughtful, generous man I'd fallen in love with. The months leading up to Rachel's wedding flew by in a whirlwind of planning and preparations. Every weekend seemed to bring a new decision to make, and Rachel wanted my opinion on everything. I was touched that she valued my input. "What do you think about this venue?" Rachel asked one Saturday, showing me pictures of an elegant converted warehouse. "It's smaller than the country club Mom suggested, but I think it has more character." "I love it," I said honestly. "Plus, it'll probably cost half as much." Rachel nodded, chewing her lip. "That's what I was thinking. Mark and I want to keep things simple. No more than 50 guests. We're both trying to be practical about money." I admired her approach. Unlike some brides who went crazy with expensive demands, Rachel was being surprisingly sensible. We spent hours comparing flower arrangements, tasting different menu options, and visiting dress shops, always with an eye on the budget. "You don't think it's too plain?" she asked, twirling in a sleek, minimalist wedding dress that cost a fraction of what Mom had expected her to spend. "It's perfect," I assured her. Sometimes less is more. Every time we made another decision or checked another item off the list, I couldn't help but smile, thinking about the surprise waiting for them. James would occasionally ask how the planning was going, and I'd catch him grinning when I mentioned Rachel's offhand comments about wanting to travel someday. "I can't wait to see their faces," he said one evening. "Have you looked at the resort photos I sent you? The overwater bungalow is going to blow their minds." His enthusiasm made me fall in love with him all over again. Here was my antisocial husband, genuinely excited about giving my sister and her fiancé the honeymoon of their dreams. But as the wedding date grew closer, something started nagging at me. 2 weeks before the big day, I realized what it was. We still hadn't received our invitation. At first, I tried to brush it off. Rachel had been so busy with preparations, and she'd involved me in every detail of the planning. Surely it was just an oversight. Still, something felt off. James and I had our outfits ready. We'd arranged time off work, and we'd been actively involved in all the planning. But we didn't have an actual invitation. After a particularly restless night thinking about it, I decided to stop by my parents' house after work to ask Rachel directly. As I pulled into the driveway, I saw both my parents' cars and Rachel's beat-up Honda. Perfect, everyone would be there. I grabbed my purse and headed to the front door, still telling myself I was probably worried about nothing. After all, we'd been instrumental in planning this whole wedding. There had to be a simple explanation for the missing invitation. I walked into my parents' living room, trying to keep my voice casual. "Hey, Rachel, I wanted to ask you something. James and I haven't received our invitation yet. I'm sure it just got lost in the mail or something." Rachel shifted uncomfortably on the couch, glancing at our parents before answering. "Oh, actually, I wanted to give it to you in person." She reached into her purse and pulled out a cream-colored envelope, handing it to me with what I now recognize was forced enthusiasm. "Here you go." My hands were shaking slightly as I opened it. The invitation was beautiful, elegant script on thick paper, exactly the style we'd picked out together. But as I read the words, my stomach dropped. There was only one name on it. Mine. "Rachel," I said slowly, my voice sounding strange to my own ears. "Why isn't James's name on this?" She straightened up, and I saw something change in her expression. Gone was the hesitation, replaced by a defiant look I'd seen many times when we were kids, just before she did something she knew was wrong. "Well," she said, glancing at our parents again for support, "we decided to keep the guest list really tight. Only the absolute closest people." I felt like I'd been slapped. Closest people. James is my husband. Heck, your brother-in-law. "Come on, Amber," Rachel said, rolling her eyes. "We all know he's not really family. He never tries to be part of anything." I turned to our parents, expecting, hoping, they would say something to correct this insanity. But Mom just sat there nodding, while Dad wouldn't even meet my eyes. "We support Rachel's decision," Mom said firmly. "Your husband doesn't enjoy these kinds of events anyway. He always looks so miserable at family gatherings." "That's not true," I protested, but Dad cut me off. "Be reasonable, Amber. He'll just sit there with that sad face of his the whole time, making everyone uncomfortable." Besides, he added, as if this was the clincher, "this way, Rachel can save some money on the catering." "Save money?" I repeated incredulously. "You're talking about excluding my husband to save money on a plate of food." "It's my wedding," Rachel said, crossing her arms. "I get to decide who comes, and I don't want him there bringing down the mood. He can stay home and code, or whatever it is he does." I stood there, looking at these three people I'd known my whole life, trying to understand how we'd gotten here. How could they sit there and so casually exclude my husband? Act like he was some random acquaintance rather than family. The worst part was seeing how rehearsed it all seemed. They clearly discussed this before, prepared their arguments, and agreed among themselves that this was perfectly reasonable. While my husband had been spending his savings on their dream honeymoon, they'd been plotting to exclude him. "Let me get this straight," I said, my voice dangerously quiet. "You want to exclude my husband to save money on the wedding that I gave you $10,000 for. $10,000 that I handed over without any conditions or expectations." Rachel's smug expression faltered slightly, but she quickly recovered. "Well, that was different. You're my sister. And James is your brother-in-law." I cut her off. "But you know what's really ironic about all this? James has spent the last 3 months planning a surprise for you. He was going to give you and Mark an all-expenses-paid honeymoon trip to the Maldives. $20,000 worth of luxury resort, overwater bungalow, first-class flights, everything." The room went dead silent. Mom's hand flew to her mouth. Dad's jaw dropped. Rachel's face went through a rapid series of expressions: disbelief, shock, and then something that made my stomach turn: calculation. The Maldives. Rachel's voice had completely changed, becoming sweet and conciliatory. "Oh my God, Amber, I was just kidding about the invitation thing. Of course James is invited. Here, let me fix the card right now." She reached for her purse, pulling out a pen. I stepped back, physically recoiling from her sudden change in attitude. "Don't bother. The trip is canceled." "What?" "No." Rachel jumped up. "Come on, I said I was joking. Don't be so sensitive." "Honey," Mom stepped in, her voice sickly sweet. "Your sister was just stressed about the wedding planning. You know how brides can be. Of course we want James there." Dad nodded vigorously. "Absolutely. He's family." I looked at their faces, faces I'd known and loved my whole life, and felt nothing but disgust. 5 minutes ago, they'd been united in excluding my husband. Now, at the mention of an expensive gift, they were falling all over themselves to backtrack. "You're right, Dad. He is family," I said, "which is why I'm not going to let you treat him like this." I turned and walked toward the door, ignoring their protests. The drive home was a blur. When I walked through our front door, James took one look at my face and knew something was wrong. We sat on our couch as I told him everything. The invitation, their excuses, their sudden change of heart when they learned about the Maldives trip. James listened quietly, his face calm as always, but I could see the hurt in his eyes. He'd spent months planning this surprise, genuinely excited about giving Rachel and Mark this gift, and they couldn't even be bothered to invite him to the wedding. "What do you want to do?" he asked finally. "Cancel the trip," I said without hesitation. "And I'm not going to the wedding. I can't sit there and celebrate with people who treat you like this." "Are you sure? They're your family." I shook my head firmly. "You're my family, and I won't let anyone treat my family like this." James nodded, opened his laptop, and within minutes had canceled the Maldives reservation. The money was immediately refunded to his account. As I watched the transaction complete, I felt a strange mixture of sadness and relief. That evening, my phone wouldn't stop buzzing. First came the calls, Rachel's name flashing on my screen every few minutes, alternating with Mom and Dad's. I silenced them all. Then the messages started flooding in. "Please don't do this to me," Rachel texted. "The Maldives has always been my dream." "Sweetheart, let's talk about this rationally," Mom wrote. "Don't make any hasty decisions about the trip. Think about your sister's happiness," Dad chimed in. As I scrolled through their messages, something became crystal clear. Not one of them mentioned James. Not one expressed regret for trying to exclude him from the wedding. Not one acknowledged how hurtful their actions had been. Every single message focused on one thing: the canceled honeymoon. "You can't cancel the Maldives trip," Rachel's next message read. "We already told Mark's parents about it." I felt a cold laugh escape my throat. Of course they had. They probably started bragging about their luxury honeymoon the moment I left the house. "The trip is already canceled," I typed back. "The money has been refunded. Don't contact me again." Then I did something I never thought I'd have to do. I blocked my sister's number, and my parents' numbers too, for good measure. James and I spent the rest of the evening watching movies on the couch, trying to pretend everything was normal. But the next morning, our peaceful Saturday was shattered by loud banging on our front door. Before we could even respond, the door burst open. My parents must have used their emergency key, the one I'd given them years ago for actual emergencies. Rachel stormed in first, followed by Mom and Dad. They didn't bother with hellos or explanations. "How dare you cancel our honeymoon?" Rachel screamed, her face red with anger. "You have to reinstate it right now." "Calm down," James said, standing up from the couch. "You can't just burst into our house like this." They ignored him completely, as if he wasn't even there. "Do you know how embarrassing this is?" Mom demanded, after we already told everyone about the Maldives. "Fix this right now," Dad ordered, pointing his finger at me. "Call whoever you need to call. We want the trip reinstated immediately." I stood my ground, my voice steady despite my racing heart. "I'm not giving expensive gifts to people who don't respect my husband or me. The trip is canceled, and that's final." Rachel's face contorted with rage. "You know what? Don't bother coming to my wedding at all. You're not invited anymore." "Rachel," James started to say, but she cut him off. "Shut up. This is all your fault. Ever since Amber married you, she's changed. She used to be fun. She used to be normal." I took a deep breath, my voice coming out surprisingly steady. "You want to talk about money? Fine, let's talk about the $10,000 I gave you for this wedding." Rachel's face went pale so quickly I thought she might faint. Mom and Dad stopped their angry muttering. "That's right," I continued. $10,000 that I could legally demand back right now since you've uninvited me from the wedding. That's how gifts work, Rachel. They can be rescinded if the occasion they're meant for no longer applies to the gift giver." You wouldn't," Rachel stammered, her previous bravado completely gone. "No, I wouldn't," I agreed. "You can keep the money. Consider it your wedding gift from your horrible, unfun sister who doesn't want to come to your wedding anyway." "But the Maldives," Rachel's voice cracked. "The Maldives was never yours to begin with," I said firmly. "It was a surprise gift from the man you couldn't even be bothered to invite to your wedding. The man you've all treated like an outsider for years. Well, congratulations. You finally succeeded in pushing us both away completely." Rachel's face crumpled, and she burst into tears. "But I dreamed about the Maldives my whole life. It's not fair." Mom and Dad immediately wrapped their arms around her, like they always had when we were kids and she didn't get her way. They shot me venomous looks as they guided her toward the door. I watched them leave, coddling my sobbing sister between them, and felt nothing. No guilt, no sadness, just exhaustion. The door clicked shut behind them, and suddenly the house was quiet again. James came up behind me and wrapped his arms around my waist. I leaned back against him, drawing strength from his steady presence. "I'm so tired," I whispered. "Tired of their arrogance. Tired of them only thinking about themselves. Tired of them treating us, like this." "I know," he said softly, kissing the top of my head. I turned to face him, a small smile forming on my lips despite everything. "You know what? Let's do something with that refunded money, something for us." "What did you have in mind?" "We've been talking about getting a new car. $20,000 would make a nice down payment." James grinned. "I might have been looking at some options already. Want to go car shopping?" 2 weeks later, we were driving home in our brand new hybrid SUV. It was beautiful, practical, and most importantly, it was ours. A symbol of our life together, our priorities, our future. As I ran my hand over the pristine dashboard, I couldn't help but feel we'd made the right choice. The day of Rachel's wedding came and went. I spent it deliberately busy. James and I took our new car for a long drive along the coast, had lunch at a quiet seaside restaurant, and tried our best not to think about what was happening back in town. But that evening, after we returned home, I couldn't help myself. I opened Instagram and went to Rachel's page. The wedding photos were already up, professionally shot, carefully filtered, perfectly posed. As I scrolled through them, I noticed something. Her smile never quite reached her eyes. In every photo, even the candid shots, she looked distracted, unsettled, like someone trying too hard to prove they were having the time of their life. 2 days later, my Aunt Susan called. She'd always been my favorite relative. Mom's younger sister, but completely different from her in every way that mattered. "I need to tell you something about the wedding," she said, her voice serious. "Your mother made a speech, one of those passive-aggressive masterpieces she's so good at. She went on about how families should stick together, how some people become too caught up in their own lives to remember their responsibilities. Then she said something about greed destroying family bonds. I felt my chest tighten. Let me guess, everyone knew exactly who she was talking about. Oh, honey, it was about as subtle as a brick through a window. The whole room was uncomfortable. Even some of Mark's family were whispering, asking what was going on. I took a deep breath and told her everything. The uninvited husband, the Maui trip, Rachel's tantrum, all of it. When I finished, there was a long pause on the line. "You did the right thing," she said finally, her voice firm. "I've watched for years as they've treated James like an outsider. It's not right, and it's not your fault. Your mother and Rachel, they've always been like this. Always had to have everything their way." Tears welled up in my eyes. "Thank you, Aunt Susan. You don't know how much that means to me." I spent a lot of time sitting in our backyard watching the sunset after we hung up. There, James discovered me and produced 2 wine glasses. He took a seat next to me and said, "What are your thoughts?" I took a sip of my drink and remarked, "I was just thinking about family, about how sometimes the hardest decisions are the right ones. Do you think you'll ever reconcile with them?" To be honest, I'm not sure. Perhaps in the future, if they can actually recognize their mistakes and make amends. However, I'm not going to hold my breath or pursue them. James grabbed my hand as he reached over. "Whatever happens, we'll face it together." I returned his squeeze while reflecting on our progress. A crisis might occasionally serve as a reminder of what matters most and who truly has your back. James was not the outsider, the one who didn't belong, as my family may have believed. True family values, loyalty, respect, and understanding had been demonstrated by him. I was quite happy as we sat in our backyard and watched the sky change from orange to purple to deep blue. In the driveway was our brand new vehicle, a representation of our future together. Our house felt more tranquil than ever, even though it was quieter now that my family wasn't causing so much trouble.
"Why won't you talk to me?" I asked. "I've decided not to talk to people I don't know," was his blunt reply. "I get it. I'll leave." Living with my husband's parents was already tough. They ignored me completely. I expected some coldness from my mother-in-law, but never thought my father-in-law would act the same. It all changed when my sister-in-law, who wasn't fond of me, moved back. Suddenly, our peaceful life was flipped upside down. "Don't regret it, okay?" I remember thinking defiantly. "You think I'll regret leaving? Think again, meanie." With that, I packed my bags and left my in-laws' house. Just 3 days after I moved out, chaos erupted there. I met my husband at work. He was in sales and frequently visited my office since I was his main contact. The more meetings we had, the more I grew to like him. He wasn't just kind and caring, he was also tall, not the typical handsome, but definitely charming. He was popular, but for some reason, he took a special interest in me and we started dating. During our conversations, he shared that he had a normal upbringing with parents and a sister. In contrast, I lost my parents young and grew up in an orphanage. It was tough, but I opened up to him about it. "That sounds tough, but don't worry, I'm always here for you," he assured me. It wasn't long before he proposed. He was eager for our relationship to lead to marriage and quickly introduced me to his family. I was nervous about telling his parents about my upbringing, but they listened attentively and reassured me that it wouldn't impact our marriage. It was comforting when they said my background didn't matter and welcomed me as their daughter-in-law. However, my sister-in-law was shocked. "You grew up in an orphanage?" she blurted out, which made my husband scold her. Looking back, she probably disliked me from the start. Before we got married, my husband and I discussed living with his parents. We considered it seriously, but I decided to keep my job. My career was progressing well, and I had just taken on more responsibilities at work. We discussed it and agreed that he would move alone after our wedding. I wanted to enjoy being newlyweds for a while, and even considered visiting him on long weekends for a mini vacation together. Moving in with my in-laws right after getting married felt overwhelming, but for my husband, it probably made him feel more at ease, possibly easing his mom's worries too. Since I had lost my parents when I was young, I had always yearned for a family, so the idea of living with his parents wasn't completely undesirable. Besides, they had always been kind to me, and over time I grew to like them. Balancing work and my role as a daughter-in-law was tough, but having a family made me feel happy and complete. Then, one day, my father-in-law approached me with a request that hinted at trouble brewing in our seemingly happy household. It happened while my usually anxious mother-in-law, who often bossed my father-in-law around, was out shopping. I was planning to clean on my day off when he asked to speak with me privately. "What's up?" I asked, curious. "Well, I don't want my wife to find out, but I need to take some time off work," he confessed, looking distressed. I was surprised. He explained that he had been struggling at work and his health was suffering. He didn't want to upset my mother-in-law, who, despite her good intentions, often became overly anxious and critical. She had noticed his recent weight loss, but instead of showing concern, she criticized him for taking sick days, accusing him of hindering his career progression. Seeing his condition worsen, he had secretly started taking time off to visit the hospital. He feared that if he suggested a break openly, it would anger my mother-in-law, especially since they depended on the extra income from his overtime. If he told my husband, it might inadvertently reach her ears. So, he turned to me, asking if I could help with the bills during his time off. Hearing that hurt. I wanted to support him, given how warmly they had accepted me despite my background, I thought to myself. So, I agreed. "Okay, I'll send you money every month. Use it for whatever you need. I'm really sorry you're going through this, but try to get better soon." After that, my father-in-law pretended to go to work while I secretly transferred money to his account for his expenses. My mother-in-law rarely checked the bank statements, so she didn't notice. He used this time to visit a mental health clinic and take walks in the mountains, which seemed to help him recover. He was getting better, and I thought he might return to work soon. But then, unexpectedly, after a fight with her husband, my sister-in-law moved back in with us. "There's nothing like being back home," she exclaimed, visibly stressed from her marital issues. "I thought I'd lose my mind if I stayed with that stupid husband of mine. I'll be here for a while. Can you make meals for me too?" From the start, I knew my sister-in-law didn't like me. During our first family gathering, my husband had to step in when she made snide remarks. Now, with her back, I sensed more challenges ahead, but I was determined to maintain peace in the family. We talked it over and decided that he would move in alone after our wedding. I wanted to savor our early days as newlyweds, and I even planned to visit him on long weekends for little getaways. The thought of moving in with my in-laws right after marrying felt overwhelming. though my husband seemed more at ease with the idea. He probably hoped it would alleviate his mom's concerns. Since I lost my parents young, I've always longed for a sense of family. Living with my in-laws wasn't entirely unwelcome. They had been kind, and I had grown fond of them. Balancing work and my duties as a daughter-in-law was challenging, but having a family made me feel fulfilled and content. However, an unexpected request from my father-in-law soon signaled trouble in our harmonious household. It was on a day my usually tense and commanding mother-in-law was out shopping. I was gearing up for some cleaning when my father-in-law pulled me aside for a chat. "I need to take some time off work," he whispered, hoping to keep it from my mother-in-law. He shared how workplace stress and deteriorating health were forcing his hand. Observing their dynamics, I saw how my mother-in-law's anxieties led her to frequently lash out, and my father-in-law, growing increasingly frail, tiptoed around her to keep the peace. Previously, when he'd taken a sick day, she'd scolded him, concerned more with appearances and promotions than his well-being. Despite his struggles, he pressed on, secretly taking time off for medical visits. He feared my mother-in-law's reaction to a formal break from work and the financial implications of losing overtime pay. Reluctantly, he turned to me, not wanting to risk involving my husband, who might inadvertently tell my mother-in-law. Moved by his plight and grateful for the acceptance his family had shown me, I agreed to support him. "I'll help with the bills," I assured him. Gratefully, he thanked me, and we devised a plan for me to discreetly send money to cover his expenses while he sought treatment. This arrangement continued with my father-in-law feigning his routine work days while actually attending therapy and finding solace in nature walks. Over time, his health improved visibly. Just when I thought things might return to normal, a new upheaval came. After a spat, my sister-in-law stormed back to her parents' home, declaring a temporary stay and demanding I cater to her as well. At our first family meeting, my husband was upset because his sister clearly showed her disapproval during the wedding. She had a sour look the entire time, and even told me straight out, "My brother looks great, but he could have married someone prettier." She openly judged me for being raised in an institution, saying it was embarrassing that I didn't have parents at the wedding. However, she got married before us and had already moved out, so I thought I wouldn't have to deal with her much. That's why I thought it would be okay to live with them. If she had still been living at home, I wouldn't have even considered moving in, knowing how she would treat me every day. I thought her stay was just temporary because of her marriage problems and expected her to leave in a few days. Even though she was stern with my father-in-law, my mother-in-law had never been harsh towards me. Even if my sister-in-law made mean comments, I believed my mother-in-law would defend me. But I was wrong. One day when I came back from work, my mother-in-law's behavior seemed strange. "Is something bothering you?" I asked. She seemed distant, not talking to me like usual. When I asked her what was wrong, she said, "Did you know you've been talking about me behind my back?" "What? I've never said anything bad about you. You've always been kind to me, and I'm really thankful. Why would I say bad things about you?" But she just said, "You've been acting like the perfect daughter-in-law, but you've been talking behind my back," and left the room. In the hallway, my sister-in-law was smirking. "Looks like you're not in her good books anymore. Did your true colors come out? Being from an orphanage, your background really does matter, huh? It's best not to gossip about people." "I haven't said anything bad about her," I replied. "Oh, the neighbors seem to have heard everything. When I came back home after so long, they told me you've been talking badly about her all the time." "What? Who are these neighbors? I demanded. Well, it's been a while since I got married and moved out, so I kind of forgot their names. I never said any of that. Stop making things up. Oh, how disrespectful, Mom. She's calling me a liar and being mean to me, my sister-in-law said as she walked into my mother-in-law's room. After that, my sister-in-law's behavior got worse. She claimed I told her to sleep in the hallway and take the last turn for a bath because she's just a guest. She complained to my mother-in-law about every little thing. Every time, I had to explain I hadn't said or done any of it. But my mother-in-law seemed to believe my sister-in-law and be influenced by her. My sister-in-law stayed longer, making me wonder if she planned to stay forever. With all these worries, I went home feeling sad. I'm back, I said, but before, my mother-in-law would warmly say, welcome back, but now it was quiet. I'll start making dinner, I said, stepping into the living room. I was surprised. Usually my sister-in-law would rush me to make dinner, but now my mother-in-law, father-in-law, and sister-in-law were eating sushi together. Surprise, my sister-in-law said. Oh, looks like someone who isn't really family is here. You were planning on having sushi, were you? My mother-in-law kept eating without looking at me, watching TV. If you wanted sushi, you should have told me. I came home right after shopping, I said. Ha, no one said they wanted that, my sister-in-law replied, not even looking at me. Hey, Mom, Dad, I went out with my friends during the day and got some delicious pudding. Let's eat together, my sister-in-law said, ignoring me. They all started eating the pudding. I was tired from work and didn't have the energy to argue, so I went to my room without eating. The next day, my sister-in-law said she was going out with friends and asked me to drive her to the station. I said no because it was a weekday and I had work. Even if we were going in the same direction, it was a different route, and she wanted to leave around noon. Just take the day off, it's fine. Your cute little sis-in-law just wants a ride. She hasn't had a chance to relax since she got married, right? Can't you be a bit nicer to her now? She said. With all due respect, didn't you go out with friends last night after getting a late call? It seems like you've been going out almost every day since you came home. I have work. Please take the bus or train. My mother-in-law and sister-in-law were talking quietly, but I was done and left for work. However, that night, the event that made me decide to leave this house happened. I got delayed at work and came home after buying groceries, expecting to face some criticism. It was raining heavily when I left the office, and I got soaked just getting in and out of the car. I wondered what nasty surprise was waiting for me tonight. But when I got home, they were all eating takeout again, just like the day before. No hello, acting like they didn't see me, but I was used to it. I looked out into the courtyard from the hallway and saw something in the middle of the garden. Looking closer, I saw it was my stuff. My designer bag that I bought with my first paycheck, shoes that were a birthday gift from my husband, and even my work computer all wet. I was shocked, and my sister-in-law said with a smirk, having the strangers' things in the house grosses me out, so I threw them out. Flaunting a designer bag like that, how arrogant of you. Neither of my in-laws said anything about her terrible behavior. Why didn't you stop her? Have I done something to you? Do you really believe her lies about me bad-mouthing you and bullying her? Aren't you upset with her for what she did? I asked. My mother-in-law avoided my eyes and stayed silent. Why won't you say anything? I asked again. I can't talk to strangers. I can't be friendly with someone who's not family, my mother-in-law replied, not even looking at me. My sister-in-law grinned, waiting for me to respond. Wait, where's my father-in-law? I've been the one supporting him during his time off. I've been the one handling finances in this house. I did it out of gratitude. But shouldn't he stand up for me now? Surely he'd be on my side. Hoping for his support, I looked at him, but he walked past me without a word and went into his room. That was it for me. I see I've had enough. Oh, are you upset? I'm sorry. Honestly, I never liked you from the start. You know, being from an institution and all. Just don't regret leaving, my sister-in-law said, as if I would. Good riddance, I replied. I packed my things and got ready to leave right away. Only my father-in-law seemed worried because he relied on me financially, but even he didn't try to stop me or speak up for me. I was done with his indifference. Although my husband's work assignment was far away, I just wanted to get out of that house as soon as possible. I quickly got into my car and drove to him. I never talked to my husband about any of this. I doubt my mother-in-law told him about my sister-in-law coming back home. If he knew, he would have reached out to me because he knows I don't get along with her. But my husband never mentioned anything about my sister-in-law in his calls or messages. I never doubted my husband's behavior before, but maybe she's manipulating him, feeding him lies about things. Even now, as I go to him, he might treat me the same way they did. My heart was heavy, feeling suspicious even toward my husband, whom I trust the most. If he's siding with them, maybe divorce is the only option. That's how distressed I felt. When I arrived at his out-of-state apartment, he hadn't returned yet, probably busy since it was the end of the month. As I waited, my husband came in energetically, maybe noticing the lights. What, you're here? You should have told me you were coming. I would have come back sooner. What a pleasant surprise. No, just seeing your face, he said with a big smile. Seeing him happy to see me after all that happened at my in-laws' house mixed with relief and humiliation. And I could have pulled back my tears. What's wrong? Did I do something? Seriously, what's going on? He asked, concerned. It seemed my husband had no clue about the treatment I endured at his parents' house. I gathered myself, knowing I needed to explain everything clearly to him. I started recounting everything, how I've been financially helping his father, who took medical leave without telling his wife, how his sister returned and was now staying at their parents' house, how she lied about me to his mother, turning her against me, how they treated me like an outsider, ignored me, and even ruined my belongings by leaving them out in the rain. Through tears and pauses, I poured out everything to him. Finally, I made it clear that I couldn't go back to that house ever again, and if he couldn't support me on this, I would want to divorce. My husband apologized for being too focused on work and not checking in on me more often. He regretted his family's behavior towards me. He assured me I didn't have to go back there or even talk to them again, even if I forgave them someday. He was firm about cutting ties with his parents and sister. He also promised not to provide any more financial aid to his father. That night, I felt a huge weight lifted off my shoulders. The tension I'd been carrying melted away, and I slept peacefully by his side. After leaving my in-laws' house, I never went back. Commuting for my husband's out-of-state place wasn't practical, but I had already talked to my company about working remotely. My job didn't require me to be in the office all the time, and many of my colleagues worked from home too. Although I still had to visit the office a few times a month, some colleagues lived even farther away, so working remotely wasn't a problem. Living with my in-laws and dealing with my sister-in-law's bullying, I hadn't truly experienced married life, but now we could finally live like newlyweds. As I set up my remote workstation as expected, my sister-in-law contacted me. It turned out that the day after I left their house was my father-in-law's payday. My mother-in-law usually takes out a certain amount and transfers it to their household account, but this time she couldn't. It was only then that she realized I had been helping them financially during my father-in-law's time off. "Hey, why didn't you tell me you were covering the living expenses?" he asked me. He asked me not to, saying he didn't want you to know, so I kept it to myself. Anyway, we're running out of money for living expenses, and there's no one to cook or do laundry. The place is a mess. As his wife, you need to come back and take care of these things and send money quickly. How heartless. I already told you, didn't I? I have no intention of going back to that house or being treated like your maid. Why should I help people who hate me, ruin my things, and treat me like this? Aren't you his wife? Without your help, we can't pay the bills or even shop. That's exactly why I'm saying it. I'm an outsider, so it's none of my business. I hung up, ignoring my sister-in-law's complaints. She and my mother-in-law kept bothering me with calls and messages, but I ignored all of them. Even after my husband returned from work, they kept calling persistently. When my husband finally answered, he told them firmly, "I will forgive you for how you treated her, and I'm not sending her back to you. I'm not coming back either. I don't see you as my family anymore. Leave my wife alone or you'll regret it." Considering my sister-in-law adored her brother and my mother-in-law heavily relied on him, they were probably shocked. A few days later, I got a call from my father-in-law. He said living with my mother-in-law and sister-in-law was getting too hard, and he begged me to continue the financial help. I'm grateful they accepted me when I married, despite growing up in an orphanage, but they didn't support me when I needed it. Despite all the financial help I provided, I don't owe them anything. Why should I help those who join others in ignoring me? I'll never assist you again. And with that, I ended the call. Later on, my persistent mother-in-law and sister-in-law shamelessly showed up at my workplace. Since I was already working remotely and had a bad feeling about them, I had informed my company about the situation. Security was alerted right away. They caused a scene, demanding that the company make me send money back home. When my husband heard about it, he said, "Report them to the police." My colleagues were supportive, saying, "I can't believe you had to live with those people. Focus on your remote work with your husband." As for my in-laws, my father-in-law's health declined under the pressure from my mother-in-law and sister-in-law, and he eventually quit his job. My sister-in-law tried to return to her husband's family, but he refused to take her back. The town quickly learned about her drama at my workplace, causing an uproar at her in-laws' place. The real reason for their fight was her affair, and this incident added to their problems, leading to an immediate decision to divorce. Left without a home, my in-laws and sister-in-law moved to a cheap apartment, managing with part-time jobs. As for my husband and me, we were finally enjoying peaceful days, feeling mentally and physically fulfilled. Recently, we found out we're expecting a child, and we couldn't be happier. We're eagerly awaiting the day we meet our baby, cherishing our time together.
Do you really believe you can fool my sister and get away with it? You had best put this right. I once came into a weak-looking, extremely gorgeous high school girl in the park. When taking her to the hospital, I made the decision to care for her in my house when she stated she had nowhere else to go. But shortly after, a black, high-end automobile pulled up in front of my apartment, and someone started tapping the intercom many times. I was terrified as I cautiously opened the door and saw a gruff-looking man with obvious criminal links standing there. He yelled, "I want the girl back," as his forehead veins swelled. I was brought to a mansion with little or no option. My name is Richard. My passion for books led me to pursue a career in librarianship. To be honest, It doesn't pay much, but I get great satisfaction from spending every day among my favorite books. On a day off, a uniformed high school girl happened to walk into the library one morning. I couldn't help but stare at her due to her remarkably attractive features and glossy black hair. It was like seeing a scene from a movie as she read. I kept looking at her while I arranged the shelves, and I even misplaced a few books. She read all day until it was time to close. I made a commitment to improve the following day after considering my errors from the previous day. Yesterday was really messy for me. She shouldn't be here today because it's Monday, and I have to concentrate. However, I was shocked to see her return soon after the library opened. She was dressed in her uniform. Asterisk there might be a brief closure of the school asterisk. She stayed till closing time once more, and the following day and the day after that, nothing changed. For 5 days in a row, she was at the library all day. My coworkers were whispering to each other by then. She comes in every day. What is the situation at her school? October is a month without any significant holidays. Her constant attendance at the library gave the impression that she had a purpose for being there. Inquisitive, I made the decision to speak with her. Hey, you must be a high school student. Are you enrolled in Stern High School? With a terrified expression, she got up and hurried out. She was moving too quickly for me to keep up with, so I lost sight of her. She never went back to the library after that day. I couldn't help but worry about her well-being. Since I didn't know her name or how to get in touch with her, there was nothing I could do. All I could do was pray she was okay. 3 days later, I had to take a detour because of road construction on my way home from work. In the park, I noticed a uniformed girl seated on a bench. Asterisk, that's the girl from high school asterisk. Hey, you're the girl from the other day, right? I hurried over to greet her. She replied, No, don't look at me, as she quickly covered her face with her hands in shock. Her outfit was a touch soiled, and her hair was a little messy. I questioned, concerned, What's your name? Her name was Emily, she nervously replied. Have you spent the night here? How are your folks doing? She clung to my arm, pleading with me for assistance. Please don't contact my parents or the school. Emily looked quite pale, which made me worry even more. October has seen a lot of pleasant days lately, but chilly snaps could strike at any time. Furthermore, it is evident that a high school girl napping in her uniform in a park is extremely risky. I nodded silently and chose to listen to her story, because I knew that if I reprimanded her now, she would probably simply turn and run from me again. All right, I get it. Please just relax. Emily released my arm in relief, but passed out on the bench right away. Emily, are you okay? She didn't react when I repeatedly shouted her name and gave her a shake. I dialed an ambulance in a panic. Not too long after, the ambulance showed up. I paused for a second when the paramedic inquired about my connection with Emily. Emily appeared to have a good reason for not wanting anyone to get in touch with her parents or school. However, if I claimed to be a stranger, they might look into it and get in touch with her family anyhow. I lied and said I was her brother, and after a moment of hesitation, I went with her to the hospital. Emily, fortunately, wasn't really sick. She hadn't eaten in 3 days, which led to anemia and dizziness, according to Dr. Smith. To allay Dr. Smith's suspicions, I disclosed to him that my sister had recently been dieting. I remained at her side till she healed because I couldn't just walk away from her. She was feeling much better after receiving IV fluids throughout the night, and she thanked me gratefully. I apologize for the inconvenience. I appreciate you covering the expenses and lying to the hospital staff. I will undoubtedly repay you. What are you going to do now? Don't worry about the money. Will you be spending the night in the park once more? She looked down and remained silent when I inquired out of concern. I let out a long sigh. Is going back to your family still not an option? No. I see. How about spending the time here at my house? What? Oh, it's not like that. I hastily added after realizing how that sounded. You can never again sleep in the park, in my opinion. I explained, a little uncomfortable, and Emily laughed softly. I recognize. Then, I'll accept your offer, she grinned and nodded. We returned to my apartment, where I prepared a basic lunch and allowed her take a shower. Even though dinner was merely a stir-fry of chicken and veggies, Emily seemed delighted and ate a lot. It was really tasty. I haven't eaten a warm supper in a long time. As a thank you, I'll cook tomorrow. Are you a cook? That seems exciting to me then. She smiled shyly. Well, don't expect anything fancy. I got her some basic requirements because she would be staying for a while, but she insisted on wearing my clothes rather than new ones. She said, sporting one of my baggy shirts, I feel bad about you buying clothes for me, which somewhat elevated my heart rate. My previously boring life was unexpectedly made happier by living with Emily. She always greeted me with a smile in the morning. Good morning. After our breakfast together, she would send me on my way to work. I hope you have a pleasant day. And she would say, welcome back to me when I got home. In the evenings, we would talk and watch TV. We slept in different rooms, but we didn't share a bed. With her present, these ordinary times became incredibly delightful. Has my smile always been this big? I used to have a really stern countenance because I was often buried in literature. However, I've noticed that I smile constantly these days. Even I was surprised when I realized that I was humming while working or walking home. My coworkers frequently made fun of me for the change, asking, did something nice happen, Richard? These days, you seem so content. Have you found a girlfriend? It was around this time that I came to a crucial realization. I love her. I hope we can be together forever. She is still a high school student, though, and I am currently serving as her guardian. Taking everything into account, I found it difficult to admit my emotions. So, what do you think of me? Emily asked me one day, maybe weary of waiting. She crossed her arms. I paused, saying, well, Emily sulked and urged, please be explicit. Okay, I'll start now. I believe I've fallen in love with you, Richard. What? I was excited and elated by her unexpected confession. I'm grateful. I also enjoy you, Emily. She grinned broadly. So, you're going to stick around here? I'll drop out of school and get a job. But what she said made me return to earth. Although I also want to be with you. What about your parents? You're still underage. This cannot be kept a secret indefinitely. She gave a head shake. Not necessary. I live it. However, I grasped her hands and met her eyes directly. You don't have to tell me why you left your house. In fact, I don't know. But this cannot be how we continue to live. People won't understand that a high school student is living with a stranger, for whatever reason. Your parents may be concerned about you. At the very least, tell them your location. But she yelled, no, with conviction, and stopped me. Certainly not. You'll be hurt if we get in touch with them. I will suffer harm. For a split second, I thought that the fear might subside if something untoward happened. It's all right. I'll make amends with you. Be at ease about me. Emily hesitantly consented to phone her father after much convincing. I'll come home tomorrow, and I'll bring the person I'm with. I was apprehensive about our future together, but I braced myself when I heard the loud ruckus on the other end of the line. 1 week to the day after I moved Emily in, a black, high-end automobile came up in front of my apartment building, and the intercom beeped loudly. I was terrified when I opened the door and saw a rugged-looking man who started threatening me. Hey, give us the girl. Emily emerged behind me as I stopped, screaming, Timothy, why are you in this place? Timothy's face went white as he saw her in my huge sweater, and he reached for my collar. How did you harm her? You had better be prepared to accept accountability. It was obvious he misinterpreted our relationship. Emily moved in to stop him in a flash. Timothy, stop. It was he who gave me assistance. With an intense scowl, she asked, Anyway, how did you know I was here? Then Timothy, who a moment before had appeared so sure of himself, fell silent and began to stutter. Well, It has to be Dad's fault, murmured Emily. Okay, I'll take care of it. She changed back inside into her uniform and came out again. I carefully asked her, still perplexed, Is your father? Emily nodded, clearly understanding what I was asking. He is, in fact, a gang boss. I didn't want to tell you because of this. I made a weird look and said, Yeah, I figured. You'll come with me to apologize, right? Emily pressed me, nevertheless. I nodded after inhaling deeply. Ever since I had taken her in, I had known that this time would come. After putting on my best suit, I got into the waiting car and drove Emily to her family's house. Her father gave her a warm hug and started to cry as he said hello. Emily, when you vanished, I was really concerned. I believed you to be abducted. I was taken aback by his surprisingly devoted behavior. Her father turned and gave me a pointed look, seeing my amazement. My daughter told me you were living with her. You have to have meant to do that with some seriousness, right? His expressions for his daughter and me were so different that I broke out in cold sweats from fear and anxiety as he pressed closer to me. But Emily's voice came up and her cheeks expanded. Dad, this is the exact reason I detest you. How many more times will you destroy my relationships? Later on, I found out that Emily's father would scare away any boys who dared to approach Emily by telling them, You better be serious about my daughter. Unfazed, her father said gravely, Of course. I refuse to give my beloved daughter to somebody who isn't prepared to provide her with a lifetime of happiness. Emily, though, was not giving up. That implies that you cannot simply set up a marriage between me and a stranger. I'm not a means to increase your power. As it transpired, her father was attempting to arrange for her to meet the son of a different gang boss. Her father answered, his face stern, People from ordinary backgrounds cannot comprehend our world. Did all the boys whom you were close to leave? Being with someone who shares our life is ideal for you. Emily bit her lip as she tried not to cry as she heard those words. I was calmly watching this discussion when I felt a wave of rage. I yelled violently at her father, forgetting the terror I had felt earlier. Are you even a father? Kids are not possessions. After 3 days in the park, her malnutrition and dehydration almost killed her. How come you're unable to see her seriousness? Sleeping in the park for 3 days. Emily heard her father ask her, Emily, why didn't you call? As his face went pale. Emily answered, I wanted you to see how serious I am, giving him a direct look. My happiness is what I choose. I refuse to wed the person you selected for me. Her following remarks completely stunned me, even though I was charmed by her bravery. Her words, I'm going to marry him, were directed at me. What? I unintentionally blurted out. Timothy, who had been listening quietly next to us, gave me a fierce scowl and spoke the words, I knew it. In a hurry, I answered, No. I took no action. She is still underage. Timothy's expression, though, did not change. Her father, meantime, remarked, I'm glad to hear that. I want you to cease seeing my daughter, but I'll pay you for having her stay with you for a week. He tried to hand me a bundle of cash that he had taken out of his wallet. I shook my head, though, and said no. I don't need these things, but I can't do nothing now that I'm aware of the circumstances. I can't allow her return to this house if you're going to keep her bound. I'll make her happy, I resolutely said. With teary eyes, Emily turned to face me and murmured, Richard. Her father chuckled and remarked, Well, you've got guts, upon witnessing this. Take Emily with you if you're willing to assume responsibility for her life. I'll give you custody of my daughter. Emily received the ultimatum from her father. Go ahead and be with him if that's what you truly desire. But we're going to break our family ties. You'll never be permitted to go back. Listening close by, Timothy stepped in with a swift "Boss, you don't have to go that far." However, her father put an end to him by saying, she'll be happier living a normal life. Emily and I bowed in appreciation. Thank you, but if you could, please come to our wedding. You should be there for her on her special day since you are her father. Her father answered, appearing to soften a little. Okay. Timothy was told to turn the car around. I swear to be her father until I see her in her wedding dress, he said. Emily's father turned away from her with a brief, I'm not seeing you off, but Emily still seemed a little reluctant. Before going back inside the home, he said, Go now. I briefly saw the sadness in her father's face and felt a slight pang of guilt, but I still got in the car. Timothy issued me a severe warning as he drove us back to the flat. Remember, no touching her before the wedding. Got it. I recognize. I swear. Emily and I made a commitment that she would complete high school, and I remained her guardian until that time. I told my folks about our engagement and introduced her to them around that time. They were taken aback to learn that my fiancée was a high school student and the daughter of a gang leader, but they respected our resolve to stand by and love one another, and they even granted us their blessing. At last, Emily's high school graduation day came. We had a tiny wedding with just immediate relatives at a little chapel on the outskirts of town immediately following the ceremony. Emily's father showed up for the wedding as promised, escorting her down the aisle and giving her to me. This concludes our conversation. Before he left the chapel, he remarked, Take care. He climbed into his black automobile and drove off, despite our hasty pursuit. We lost communication with him after that. Eventually, his old house was cleared. We later found out that he had disbanded the gang he had inherited since the group was disintegrating. He had moved on to pursue a new life somewhere. Sometimes Emily would cry when she thought of her father, but she would also bravely grin and say, We shouldn't get in the way of his decision. I will shortly become a mother. We were expecting a child a few years after we got married. I whispered to Emily as I patted her belly softly, Let's get a detective to find your father after our baby is born. He was an obstinate man, but even he would have wanted to see his grandchild. Emily put her palm over mine and grinned slightly, saying, You really are brave. But I'm glad I chose to be with you. I carried on with my employment as a librarian in the interim. Shortly after our baby was born, I was working at the library as normal when someone I didn't expect to see came in. It was Emily's father, which astounded me. With an earnest attitude, he took a seat and began to read a book. As soon as I saw the book's title, I realized what was going on. Sir, it's you, isn't it? I yelled as I chased after him as he attempted to leave at closing time. Startled, he spun around and attempted to get away. Holding his wrist, I urged, Please don't run away like your daughter did. He gave up and stopped. This concludes my shift. Would you please come see Emily? Our son was born recently. Though emotion flashed in his eyes, he answered, No, I'm too busy. Are you not at liberty? You're not working right now, are you? Pointing to the book he was holding, I remarked. It was a book about job hunting, and it was a weekday. It was evident that he was unemployed at the moment. Then he begged, Please keep Emily in the dark. Due to his age and gang history, he had attempted to obtain a new work but had encountered difficulties. He looked hurt and stated, I don't want Emily to know about this pathetic situation. With all due respect, I believe you've improved greatly since last time, I replied. More human, perhaps. Back then, you were extremely menacing. He shot back, What did you say? With anger. However, I grinned and went on. Emily is eager to see you. She'll accept you for who you are right now." He reluctantly consented to accompany me home. Emily seemed truly astonished when we arrived. She hugged her father and started crying right away. "Dad, where have you been all this time?" As he gave his daughter a hug, her father started crying too. We all moved in together after that. He continued to look for jobs while taking care of his grandchild and helping with cleaning. I practiced interviews with him and assisted him with his resume, but I couldn't help but criticize him all the while. "This resume has handwriting that is too sloppy. While writing flawlessly is not required, try to make it readable. It's important that you grin more warmly during the interview rather than eerily. Your voice is too frightening. Try talking more softly." I understood why he had had trouble getting a job. Both his interview style and resume needed work. He finally was hired by a company because of the counsel I gave him. He now spends his days obeying orders from superiors, which is different from before, but he enjoys his work. "Working with others brings me such fulfillment," he remarked one evening after finishing his shift. With a kind smile, Emily remarked, "I'm happy that you finally turned into a great person, Dad. You can now gladly serve as the grandfather of my child." Hey, you stay away from places like this. I was told this by Nick, a supervisor from the same company, just the other day. I had taken a paid leave for today, and he had already made a snide remark about it. Yet here we were, running into each other unexpectedly. The man standing next to him looked like he couldn't possibly lead a decent life. I wanted to run away. In desperation, I maintained minimal defense, but this only ended up infuriating the man even more. Behind me was my wife, looking anxious. We found ourselves in a dire predicament, but the situation took a drastic turn with the appearance of a certain woman. Later on, this incident would profoundly change the lives of Nick and the Mafia man. My name is Kevin. I am 38 years old, a regular office worker in a small to medium-sized company, and I hold the position of section head. I have a wife who is 3 years younger than me, but we don't have children. Right after we got married, my wife was diagnosed with a disease that led to the complete removal of her uterus. This meant that it was no longer possible for us to have children. I thought living just the two of us wasn't too bad, but after the surgery, my wife was quite distressed and often threatened to divorce, blaming herself for ruining my life. Honestly, those days were like living through hell. But by facing my wife head-on and having numerous discussions, we managed to find peace even without children. Going on trips together or enjoying slightly expensive dinners made me feel completely happy. Gradually, my wife started to recover, and around the time I was promoted to section head, an incident occurred. Just before this incident, the previous department head had retired. Sitting in that empty department head seat was Nick in his mid-40s. He was selected to be the department head, but Nick was the nephew of the CEO, Mr. Yale, who had joined the company through connections. Nick, who believed strongly in educational elitism, refused to entrust important tasks to employees with only high school diplomas, delegating only basic tasks to those with college degrees. Naturally, the less educated employees were angry at this unfair assignment of work, while the college graduates complained of the abnormal increase in their workload. Yet all Nick did was shout, "If you have a problem with my methods, leave right now." Remember, I am the nephew of Mr. Yale, and he showed no signs of listening. Since then, Nick began to decide everything based on educational attainment. When a high school graduate tried to attend an important meeting with a client, Nick would say, "You're pointless." A high school grad shouldn't be sticking their nose into this and arbitrarily make changes. Or when a college graduate helped a high school graduate employee, he would say, "Don't pamper them. You are a college grad. You shouldn't need to help such people." Thanks to Nick's arrival, our department became chaotic, and now someone quits almost every month, leading to an abnormal situation. The reason Nick can continue to be arrogant is that our office is a branch, not the main headquarters. Mr. Yale, His uncle is based at the headquarters and seems to be abroad often, focusing on globalization efforts. Furthermore, our branch manager, Mr. Harvey, is conservative. At first, everyone complained to Mr. Harvey, but now no one does anymore. Mr. Harvey would say, "Endure it. He's the nephew of Mr. Yale," and wouldn't deal with our complaints at all. That's why, unwillingly, we had to accept Nick's tyranny, and our workplace became a place where hard-working people suffer. Thus, those who work earnestly are the quickest to leave. While we do recruit new employees, the people who could train them have left, so no one can teach them. Even if someone could teach, Nick would say, "Don't learn from anyone but a college graduate," and appoint some college-educated employee as the trainer. Consequently, college graduates not only have a heavier workload, but now also have to train new hires, leading some to mistreat the newcomers. This means that the new hires don't develop well, and within 2 or 3 months they leave, worsening the atmosphere further. Employees who can't leave are mostly those with families. They need money for their children's education, their wives are expecting, or they are paying for their parents' care in nursing homes. Everyone has such circumstances, and quitting at such a time would put their families in trouble. Nick knows this and seems to exploit it. If something happens, he would tell the male employees, "If you run away, your wife and kids will suffer, won't they?" And to the female employees, "In this day and age, no one would hire a woman with kids like you if you leave such a good company." Everyone is looking for a job change, but it's hard to find a good place, and knowing that others will suffer if they leave makes it difficult for them to actually quit. I am one of those people. Recently, my wife and I have been planning something, so I cannot afford to be unemployed. Additionally, our income greatly affects our plans. Therefore, I absolutely have to find a company that offers better conditions and is okay in terms of salary. It's hard to find such a company, and my job hunting efforts aren't going well. This method of Nick's, taking employees' families hostage, puts everyone under immense stress. Gradually, the branch's performance started to decline. Annoyed, Mr. Harvey forced us into unreasonable overtime and mandated work on holidays, creating a chaotic situation. I was living amidst the uncertainty. Perhaps due to such a lifestyle, my spirit was considerably drained. But then, unexpectedly, I received a call from someone. It was from my mother, who lives far away with my sister. "Mike's 3rd death anniversary is coming up, so come back home. And isn't Kate's birthday soon? She's always been so focused on the house and hasn't married, always staying single. Let's at least celebrate with just us." Though I had planned to return for my father's 3rd death anniversary, it was surprising that my mother wanted to celebrate Kate's birthday. In our family, the women are quite strong, and usually, my sister and my mother have been at the forefront of everything. I remember my father saying with a laugh that I couldn't hold a candle to the way my mother and my sister officially managed the house. Of course, my wife was invited too, and when I checked with her, she was happy about it. So I replied okay to my mother and had already submitted a leave application at work. As expected, Nick sneered, "Taking leave? It's such a busy time, huh? Well, there's limited stuff a high school grad like you can do anyway. Do as you like." At least we had planned to take leave on Friday, fly back with my wife, and meet my mother at a restaurant she had chosen on Saturday night. Then the day arrived. The traffic's bad, and the taxi isn't moving much. "Sorry, but could you go ahead without me?" Having just received this message from my mother, my wife, and I decided to go ahead into the restaurant. We had reserved a private room in the back, but had to pass the counter seats to get there. As we were being led by the staff, a voice called out from the side, "Hey, isn't that you, Kevin? Wondered what you'd do taking leave. A date with your wife in the distant suburbs. I don't mind, but it's a shame the burden falls on other employees. Actually, what's a guy like you doing in a nice place like this?" Turning around, there was Nick with his usual irritating smirk. I had heard from a colleague that Nick was also going back home or something, and he had dumped his work on others before leaving on Friday. Beside him sat a burly man who clearly didn't seem like a decent person. He scrutinized me from head to toe as if sizing me up. Feeling uncomfortable, I tried to pass by with a brief greeting, but Nick grabbed my arm to stop me. "Wait a minute. Since we're here, let me introduce you to this guy. This is my friend Tucker, and this is one of my subordinates, not much to show for himself, just a bottom feeder with only a high school diploma." Before I could say anything, Nick condescendingly introduced me. As Nick spoke, the mafia-looking man named Tucker said, "Oh, really? But you dress pretty nice. Looks like you have money, huh? Hey, since it's such a rare occasion, why don't you join us for a drink today? Of course, you're treating. Even though you look younger, well, age aside, you're paying anyway." Feeling a bad premonition, I instinctively protected my wife by standing in front of her. "I cannot do that. I have plans to dine with my family today," I refused. Tucker's face stiffened instantly. His irritation became apparent as he started fidgeting restlessly. Nick had a look of exasperation as if saying, "Just go along with it." I had no time to deal with these guys, so I turned on my heel to head to the private room, but an irritated Tucker said, "Wait," and continued, "Don't you see? I'm a mafia collecting protection money around here. Do you understand what happens if you defy me? Is it okay if something happens to your wife behind you? Huh?" Tucker's gaze alone was intimidating enough to make one tremble, and for a moment my legs froze. My wife looked at me with concern and anxiety. I could simply give Tucker and Nick some money to resolve this for the safety of my wife, but it didn't feel right to yield to such tactics. I struggled to control a strong impulse and responded firmly, "No matter what, I will not comply with your demands." Just as I spoke, Tucker, seemingly reaching his limit, abruptly stood up from his chair. "What are you doing?" A commanding voice echoed through the small restaurant. Everyone's gaze shifted to the entrance, where a petite woman was standing. Startled, I checked the time. About 5 minutes had passed since we entered. Wearing large sunglasses and sporting nearly blonde long hair, she exuded an impressive aura. For a moment, I thought I saw Tucker's eyes waver. Meanwhile, Nick, unaware of who the woman was, shouted at her, "Who are you, lady? Outsiders should keep their mouths shut." Ignoring his words, the woman approached us with a click of her high heels. Then to me, she said, "You, if you're even the son of Mike, you need to pull yourself together. I feel embarrassed as your sister." Surprisingly, I was the one being scolded. Scratching my head, I apologized, "Sorry, Kate." At that, Tucker let out an almost scream-like shout, his sister. To Nick, it must have seemed irrelevant that the sister I was going to have dinner with had appeared. But to Tucker, my sister Kate seemed to be someone special. He started trembling as he looked at her. Nick was taken aback and asked him, "What's wrong?" Ignoring Nick, Tucker greeted her energetically, "Kate, it's been a while." Kate slightly shifted her pitch-black sunglasses to look at Tucker and burst out laughing. "Oh, it's you, Tucker. I was wondering who dared mess with my brother and sister, huh?" By the end of her sentence, her expression had turned serious, and Tucker seemed only capable of trembling. Nick, still not understanding the situation, looked back and forth between us. As Tucker desperately told him, "Nick, you better apologize. It's for your own good," Nick seemed to grasp what was happening. Nick slowly apologized to her. Sighing, she turned to Tucker and asked, "Who taught you to be a nuisance to others? Me or Mom? Surely not Dad, right?" Tucker shook his head vigorously, denying her words. Nick whispered to Tucker, "Who is this woman?" Eyes wide, Tucker corrected him. "How dare you say this woman? She's the underboss of our mafia family." Realizing everything, Nick trembled as he uttered, "Even a woman and the underboss of a mafia family?" This was a sensitive point for her. At Nick's words, her eyebrows twitched and her face contorted with displeasure. Though Tucker had been pale with fear before, now his face turned completely white. Indeed, as Tucker said, she is the underboss set to take over the top spot of a mafia family. She is actually feared by the members. Typically, men dominate the top ranks of the mafia, and many might have heard of the term gangster's wife. When our father was the head, our mother was that gangster's wife. But after his sudden death, she temporarily became the acting head. Of course, there were calls for me, the eldest son, to be the next head, but I stepped down. Marrying a civilian wife and not wanting to involve her were my main reasons, but I also believed I lacked the ability to lead a mafia family. Despite some insistence on having a male head, it was Kate who silenced them with her capability. She has always been tough, with a strong sense of justice and a deep love for family. She might have been looked down upon for being a woman, as Nick said, but she brushed off those words and secured her position. She had faced many challenges, but they only made her mentally stronger, and she is now eager to relieve our mother of her burdens. Now, no one dares to belittle her as just a woman. Everyone knows she dislikes that term, and all members of our mafia family agree that she is the rightful next boss. Tucker repeatedly begged for forgiveness from her, and Nick, having heard the conversation, realized she was no ordinary woman. For once, Nick's arrogance faded, and he trembled noticeably. Then, in contrast to my formidable sister, a carefree voice sounded, "Sorry I'm late." Oh, what's this? Needless to say, it was our mother. Tucker, regretting messing with me, looked at me with teary eyes. My mother quickly grasped the situation and turned to Tucker, asking, "Aren't you the boy from back then?" It seems quite tense here, but can you explain what's happening? Overwhelmed by my mother's commanding aura, Tucker kept apologizing. To a confused Nick, I explained, "As you can see, Tucker is a member of the mafia family led by our mother, the current head, and my sister, the next head." Tanner stared at Kate and me, his teeth chattering. With a sigh, Kate suggested, "Let's not disturb the other customers here. Let's talk in the private room in the back." Tucker, looking utterly deflated, had no choice but to agree. Nick, having relied on Tucker's authority, clearly lacked the courage to challenge someone who even Tucker obediently followed. He replied in a voice as faint as a mosquito's and followed us timidly. We took our seats and ordered drinks. After hearing some of the situation from Kate, our mother spoke to Tucker in a low, grave tone. "How dare you disgrace our family's name in such a place? The worlds of the street and the mafia are different. You should know better." The usual swagger drained from Tucker as he faced the stern reproach from our mother, the current head of our family. He was profusely apologetic. Next, my mother turned her attention to Nick, who was frozen in place, not moving an inch. Having no courage to fight against them, Nick looked down, sending me a look as if begging for help. I'm sure Nick also believed that I wouldn't come to his rescue, but he knew all too well that it was only now, after he had repeatedly been sarcastic towards me, that he found it convenient. Indeed, the way Nick looked at me seemed less hopeful and more like a faint glimmer of hope. In the worst case, he might be crushed by our family. If Mr. Yale ever found out about this, Nick could be demoted from his managerial position for colluding with the mafia. As the saying goes, the eyes are the windows to the soul. Nick spoke volumes with his eyes alone. I sighed softly and spoke to my mother, who looked like she was about to explode in anger. It's partly my fault. I should have stood up for myself instead of backing down. Both Nick and Tucker looked stunned, as if they had never expected me to defend them, their faces showing a glimmer of hope. Kate then said to me, "Are you showing them mercy? From what I just heard, that person looked down on you just because you only finished high school and practically humiliated you in public. You're still going to forgive him?" Nick, at a loss for words, tightly closed his eyes. Tucker started to look visibly nervous. My mother remained silent, observing the situation. I slowly began to speak, sharing my thoughts. I don't like conflicts. You two should know this best. Don't resolve matters by force, but by dialogue. Wasn't that Dad's favorite saying? I may not be as strong as you and the others, but I can engage in dialogue. With that, I straightened my posture and looked Nick in the eye. Nick seemed momentarily confused, but then returned my gaze seriously. You were anxious, weren't you? Being the nephew of Mr. Yale, you feared not being taken seriously. And your focus on academic credentials stems from your own struggles to pass entrance exams for a prestigious university. While that's an achievement to be proud of, it doesn't mean that all employees who didn't go to college have given up or dropped out. Isn't society about understanding and respecting each other, helping one another? Nick had nothing to say in response. Instead, Tucker spoke up. I'm sorry. I was just bluffing. Like Nick, I have a sister suffering from a chronic illness, and Kate helped with the medical expenses. I wasn't aware of that. As I looked towards Kate, she shrugged and said, Tucker's sister is your age. His brother was originally a part of our family and was a great ally of mine. So, for Tucker and his sister, they're like family to me. I helped out with the medical costs with my own money and some from our mother. It's my way of returning the favor since his brother always stood by me, even when I felt isolated. While I was surprised to hear about this connection between her and Tucker, it seemed just like her to go to such lengths. My mother also silently approved of what Kate was doing as the next head of the family. Tucker apologized again for his misconduct. Even though I was unaware, I ended up repaying your kindness with betrayal. You said you would cover the full amount, but I'll work and pay it all back. Before Kate and my mother could respond, I said, There's no need for that. Tucker looked back at me, surprised. I continued to express my thoughts. Indeed, what you did could have tarnished our family's reputation. I live in the civilian world now, detached from the family business, but such actions could inconvenience Kate, my mother, and the members, especially your brother. Pausing for a moment, Tucker seemed to take my words to heart, giving me a serious look. I added, But you've managed to apologize properly. Normally, one might make excuses to justify their actions. You could easily say that since I'm no longer involved with the family business, it's none of my business, but you didn't resort to such tactics. Instead, you admitted your mistakes openly. I don't think Kate and the others would impose further punishment on someone like that. With that, as if breaking the tension, my mother burst out laughing. I was momentarily flustered, thinking I had said something odd. But then she, no longer the head of our family, but as a mother, said to me, You're becoming more and more like your father. Normally, I would have to condemn Tucker for tarnishing the family's name, but as you said, he's taken responsibility and apologized. This time, I'll forgive him for your sake. I was relieved. Honestly, it was almost a gamble whether my mother would let Tucker off the hook. Since my father's death, she has led with unmistakable authority to ensure she wasn't underestimated, resolving conflicts within the family with decisiveness. Kate, too, had made considerable efforts to demonstrate her capabilities, deeply understanding what it means to be part of the mafia. Whether to forgive Tucker was a delicate matter, but I was relieved that my words had an impact. Tucker, likely never expecting this outcome, teared up and grasped my hand, saying, Thank you for protecting me, even though I was so rude. Out of the blue, I slowly shook my head in response to his words. I hadn't really protected Tucker. I had simply stood by my own principles and followed through with them. When I explained this, Tucker, deeply moved, said, You are my hero, and showed respect for me, even though I'm younger than him. Feeling a bit odd, I asked him to stop saying that. Please don't say it like that. That's not really my style, I said hesitantly. Perhaps finding it amusing, Kate burst out laughing, dispelling the somber mood, and my mother suggested we toast with some beers that were just brought out. While looking apologetic, Tucker accepted a beer mug. However, Nick, who had been silent until then, politely declined and said, "I need to cool off outside. Tucker, stay here," before he stood up and left the restaurant. I debated whether to follow Nick, but finding no words to comfort him at the moment, I decided to let him be. Ultimately, with one more person, we went ahead and celebrated Kate's birthday as planned, enjoying a delightful meal together. Nick didn't return to the restaurant after that. Having completed my father's memorial service, I returned to the apartment where I live with my wife. When I went to work as usual the following Monday, something felt off. The office, which had been frantic lately, was unusually calm and settled today. I went to my desk and asked a colleague next to me what happened. Apparently, Nick had been transferred or something, and someone who came in temporarily this morning was now in charge. Thanks to him reverting the work assignments Nick had messed up, the daily chaos had settled down. We, the high school graduate employees, had been idle for a while, so we started to regain our motivation. Meanwhile, the college graduate employees finally had some breathing room. 6 months after Nick suddenly disappeared, the department had returned to its previous calm state. One day, on my way home, I heard children's voices from the park and instinctively looked in that direction. There, in a suit, Nick was sitting on a bench. I hurried over and called out, "Nick." He turned around in surprise and smiled weakly. It was a surreal scene. 2 middle-aged men sitting on a park bench, but I didn't mind and listened to Nick. I've never met someone with a heart as clean as yours, and it made me feel ashamed of myself. Everything you said back then hit the nail on the head. I was panicking, resenting the high school grads for not having it as tough as me, just fueling my own competitiveness. That realization made it impossible for me to go back to the office. He accepted a cup of coffee I bought from a nearby convenience store. As he thanked me and drank it, Nick's profile looked somewhat lonely. Right after that incident, he confessed everything he had done to his uncle, Mr. Yale, and asked for a disciplinary leave of his own accord. Starting that Monday, Nick had taken voluntary leave and proceeded with his resignation without telling any of us. Apparently, he couldn't face us. He had been job hunting since then, but it wasn't going well. Realizing how much he had relied on connections for his job before joining our company, he had been living as a part-time worker, having quit a well-known company within a year despite graduating from a prestigious university. Unable to cope with the reality that there were always bigger fish, worried about such a nephew, Mr. Yale had given him a chance at our company. Lost for words, I hesitated. But then, Nick, in contrast to his earlier demeanor, smiled brightly and said, "I've realized just how flawed I am. I can't stay here. I've decided to apprentice under the owner of the restaurant where Tucker works. It's a fresh start, but this time I feel like I can pull it through." Surprised by his story, it turned out that Tucker had stopped his half-hearted involvement with the Mafia family and started working as a restaurant chef. That place was a restaurant his sister used to visit when she was healthy. He was determined to make meals for her once she was allowed to leave the hospital or come home temporarily. Of course, Kate hadn't billed him for the medical expenses, but Tucker had decided to save up a significant amount to repay her someday. Inspired by Tucker's actions, Nick decided to join him as an apprentice for his own self-reflection. The restaurant owner was short on hands and grateful for the help, and Nick was set to leave by plane the next day. "This is probably my last time wearing a suit and walking through the city. I sat here because the sunset looks the most beautiful from this spot," he explained. After listening to him, various words came to mind, but what I needed to say to Nick right then weren't words of consolation or encouragement. Slowly, I raised my head and looked towards Nick, saying, "Take care." Surprised by my unexpected farewell, Nick briefly showed a stunned expression, but quickly smiled and replied, "Yeah, I'll be off then. You take care too." 3 years passed. I visited my hometown again and knocked on the family home's gate. Instead of the typical scene of underlings lined up, I leisurely walked down the path leading to the house, taking in the view of the garden. Upon seeing us, my mother immediately brightened up with a big smile and exclaimed, "Welcome back." Then, without paying much attention to me, she immediately turned to my wife and said, "I know it's been tough, but please continue to support him." My wife responded with a smile and handed a precious baby she was carrying to my mother. Carefully cradling her, my mother looked at her peaceful sleeping face and said, "Hello there, Grandma's here." Yes, we had welcomed a new life into our family. Since my wife doesn't have a uterus, this child isn't our biological offspring. Although the child came to us through special adoption, she's already an important part of our family. We had been planning this special adoption for a long time. The screening was rigorous, and there were many couples waiting for a child, so it took over 3 years for our turn to come around. But having finally been able to welcome a child into our family, we brought her to my mother, who had been looking forward to this moment. In fact, the child's birth mother was from this area, which was one of the reasons we moved here after the adoption. It took a while for us to settle down, and for me to feel comfortable showing the child to my mother, but she was visibly overjoyed to meet her grandchild. My wife also gazed lovingly at our child. For me, it wasn't important whether the child was born to my wife or not. What mattered was that this child had come into our lives, and I felt it meaningful to raise her as our own. My mother felt the same, and even Kate, who joined us later and is typically known as a formidable figure in the mafia, wore a gentle smile. Children are remarkable. For the sake of this child's future, I would sever ties completely with my mother and Kate. My wife and I had many doubts about this. After all, it wasn't my idea, but one that my mother and others had decided upon after months of deliberation following the child's arrival. We decided to respect their decision. Thus, today was the first and last day for my mother and others to meet this child. Given the circumstances, we left the child with my mother for a while, and my wife and I went to a restaurant. It was just past the busy lunch hour, so the restaurant was quiet with few other customers. As we entered, we were greeted with a hearty welcome. As we took our seats, a familiar face, now a waiter, brought us a menu and cheerfully said, "Long time no see. Today's special is grilled chicken made by Nick. It's really the best." My wife and I burst out laughing, and from the back of the kitchen came Nick's embarrassed shout, "Stop it, that's not my special." The restaurant owner joined in the laughter, and I could tell that these three had built a good relationship. Tucker's sister was still hospitalized, but she had recently been granted temporary leave and had come to this restaurant to eat some of Tucker's specials. Tucker's dream had come true, and it seemed he now had a new goal: to open a new restaurant with Nick. How these two became friends was still a mystery, but it was clear they were bound by an invisible strong bond. After finishing our meal and getting ready to pay, I encouraged them, "Keep up the good work." Nick, who once had a troubled expression, and Tucker, who used to tremble in fear, were no more. Both responded with bright smiles. Yes, life exists as uniquely as there are people, and if one were to look into their history, they would find a mix of highs and lows. Feeling that I had glimpsed a part of that, I felt strangely moved. I would now build a life with my newly adopted daughter and my family. With that prospect of future joys, my wife and I left the restaurant hand in hand.
Olivia here, and I'm 29 years old. I've been working as an event planner for the past 5 years. I've planned birthday parties, anniversaries, weddings, you name it. Although it's not what I had anticipated doing when I was younger, life has a strange way of taking you by surprise. In college, I studied economics, but it wasn't my passion. I became interested in planning entertaining and educational activities on campus throughout my stay there. I started off small, leading study groups and movie nights here and there. But before I knew it, I was the guy who was called upon to organize any kind of event. I knew I wouldn't be happy crunching figures in an office after graduation, so I took a risk and launched my own event organizing company.
At first, it wasn't simple. I had to start my reputation from zero by accepting any job that came my way. Even though I was stressed about paying the rent that month, I would cheerfully tell prospective clients that no event is too small. But news got out, slowly but certainly. Before I realized it, I had more work than I could manage after serving one happy client after another. 5 years passed quickly, and now I have a successful business and a solid reputation. I'm seated across from Mr. Johnson today. He's a prosperous businessman who turns 50 next month. He wants a party to remember, and I'm going to make sure he gets one. I take out my notebook and say, "So, Mr. Johnson, what were your plans for your big day?" With a contemplative expression on his face, he reclines in his chair. "Well, I was envisioning something elegant, perhaps a Grand Hotel black tie event." I nod and start taking notes. What a fantastic location. We may adopt a vintage Hollywood motif, complete with a red carpet arrival and paparazzi-style photographers. I'm speaking when my phone buzzes. I look at it, about to dismiss the call, but I hesitate when I see the name on the screen. Sarah, my sister, is here. I suppose I should now give some background on my family. It's not simple. Sarah, my younger sister, is 7 years younger than myself. She has always been our parents' favorite child. Please understand that although my parents also looked after me, there was always a difference in their treatment of us. My grandmother, bless her soul, stepped in to help when they couldn't find the money to support me while I was in college. However, when Sarah entered college a few years later, my parents found themselves suddenly able to afford both her tuition and a rented residence. I won't lie, it hurt. I've come to terms with it over time, but it's still been there. Seeing Sarah's name on my phone surprises me because I don't communicate with my family very much these days. I apologize, Mr. Johnson, as I get to my feet. Please pardon me for a moment. It's my sister, and she doesn't usually call. He smiles politely and waves me off. Take your time, of course. I exit the room and pick up the phone. Sarah, how are things going? Olivia. Her tone is lively and animated. You must see Mom and Dad as soon as possible. We have exciting news. I groan, realizing how foolish this was. All right, I promise to arrive as quickly as I can. I hang up and walk back to Mr. Johnson, expressing my sincere regret. I apologize, but I need to attend to a family emergency. Shall we try again tomorrow? Luckily, he is understanding. I have a knot in my gut as I make my way to my parents' house. I hadn't visited in months, and I wasn't really excited about this last-minute family get-together. My mother answered the doorbell with a fake smile on her face when I called. Come in, Olivia, please. The family room was packed. My dad was seated in his favorite armchair. Sarah was virtually bouncing with excitement as she sat on the couch. Beside her stood a man I didn't know, roughly my age, and he had a kind smile on his face. Olivia. Sarah leaped to her feet, took the man by the hand, and dragged him towards her. This is my fiancé, Mark. Surprised, I blinked. Fiancé? Okay, congrats. Although Mark appeared to be a decent guy, I couldn't help but wonder how long they had been dating. Sarah had never spoken of him previously. I turned to face Sarah and said, So, is this why you called me over? To have a meeting with Mark? Sarah grinned more broadly. Yeah, in part, but in more detail. Almost bouncing, she clenched her hands together. Please organize our upcoming engagement celebration. It's almost here. There was a sinking sensation in my gut. Oh, Sarah, I'm not sure. I have a lot on my plate right now. Irrelevant. Suddenly, my father spoke up, his tone rough. We are discussing your sister here. Family is the most important thing. I swallowed a response about how, in my time of need, my family hadn't come first. I faked a smile instead. Dad, it's not that easy. I owe other clients something, You're the greatest at this stuff, though, Sarah persisted. And my dream engagement party is going to be the best ever. It will be free, of course. Would you really charge your own sister? I noticed expectant faces as I glanced around the room. Mark appeared to think that I wouldn't be doing this for nothing. I thought I was cornered. All right, I at last murmured, my voice straining. I'll do the organizing for free. However, you will be responsible for paying for the venue, cuisine, decorations, music, and any other costs. Sarah gave me a hug and squealed, Olivia, you're the greatest. We pledge to cover any other expenses. An hour later, having listened to Sarah's elaborate plans for the ideal engagement party, I felt a mix of remorse and acceptance as I left the house. I would have to give Mr. Johnson a call in order to postpone our meeting. A lucrative deal vanished. I took up my phone when I got home and contacted Mr. Johnson. It's Olivia, Mr. Johnson. I'm very sorry, but it looks like I won't be able to host your birthday celebration. There's a family duty to attend to. In addition, my buddy Lisa is a fantastic event planner. If you would want, I can provide you her contact information. I apologized again and gave Lisa's information before hanging up. I felt a knot in my stomach as I gazed at my phone. I had recently declined a big customer for a work for which I wasn't even compensated. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of planning and preparations. I secured a beautiful restaurant for the date Sarah wanted. It wasn't easy. The place was popular and usually booked months in advance, but Tony, the owner, couldn't resist my pressure. I worked with the chef to create a spread that would impress even the most discerning guests. Then came the decorations, the music, the invitations. Every detail had to be perfect. I called my go-to DJ, Mike, to book him for the event. He agreed, albeit reluctantly. I had similar conversations with all my usual contractors, the florist, the cake baker, the photographer. They all trusted me enough to agree to delayed payment, but I could sense their unease. As the days passed, I found myself turning down other jobs to focus on Sarah's party. It was eating into my income, but I told myself it would be worth it to see my sister happy. Finally, with everything arranged, I sat down to create the invoice. I carefully itemized every expense, from the venue rental to the last flower in the centerpieces. The total was substantial. I took a deep breath and emailed the invoice to Sarah. There, I muttered to myself. All done. That evening, my phone rang. It was Sarah. Hey, sis, I answered. Did you get the invoice? There was a moment of silence. Then Sarah's voice came through, sickly sweet. Olivia, darling, there must be some mistake. Why are you sending me a bill? I frowned, confused. What do you mean? It's the invoice for all the expenses for your engagement party. Remember, you said you'd cover everything except my fee. Sarah laughed, a sound that sent chills down my spine. Oh, Olivia, I thought you understood. You're supposed to pay for all of this. You make so much money with your business. I was speechless. My mind raced, thinking of all the vendors waiting to be paid, all the promises I'd made based on Sarah's word. Sarah, listen to me, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. I organized this for free, which is already a huge favor. I can't pay for everything else, too. You promised. But Sarah had already hung up. I tried calling my parents, hoping they could talk some sense into Sarah. But to my horror, they took her side. They insisted I should pay, that it was my duty as the successful daughter. I hung up, my hands shaking with anger and disbelief. How could they do this to me? How could they expect me to bankrupt myself for a party? As I sat there trying to figure out what to do, a notification popped up on my phone. It was a post from Sarah on social media. Curious, I clicked on it. Can't wait for tomorrow's engagement party. The post read, So excited to celebrate with everyone. We've spent so much to make it perfect. In that moment, something snapped inside me. If Sarah wanted to play games, well, two could play at that. My fingers trembled as I dialed the restaurant's number. It was late, but I knew Tony would still be there, closing up after the night's service. "Tony, it's Olivia. I'm so sorry, but I need to cancel tomorrow's event. I'll pay you a cancellation fee and I'll make this up to you, I swear." Tony sighed. "All right, Olivia, I trust you, but this isn't like you." One by one, I called all the vendors, the florist, the DJ, the cake baker, everyone. Each call was painful, each explanation more humiliating than the last. By the time I finished, my savings account was significantly lighter, but at least my professional relationships were intact. I paid everyone their fees and cancellation charges out of my own pocket. I barely slept that night. When morning came, I made myself a strong cup of coffee and settled in front of my computer. I knew Sarah would be live streaming her arrival at the restaurant. I wanted to see this. Right on schedule, Sarah's beaming face appeared on my screen. She was outside the restaurant, surrounded by a group of excited-looking friends and family members. "We're here," Sarah chirped into her phone camera. "I can't wait to show you guys everything. It's going to be amazing." I watched as she confidently strolled up to the restaurant doors, her fiancé Mark in tow. She reached for the handle, still chattering away to her viewers. "And here Oh. The smile froze on Sarah's face as she tugged at the door. It didn't budge. "That's weird," she laughed nervously, trying again. "It must be stuck." But it wasn't stuck. Sarah's eyes widened as she finally noticed the sign on the door. "Event canceled." In big letters. The live stream erupted in confused comments. Sarah's face paled as she turned to Mark, who looked equally bewildered. I couldn't help but feel a twinge of satisfaction as I watched the chaos unfold. It was petty, I knew, but after years of being the family doormat, it felt good to finally stand up for myself. My phone started buzzing almost immediately. Sarah's name flashed on the screen. I took a deep breath and answered. "Hello, Sarah." "Olivia!" she screeched. "What the hell is going on? The restaurant is closed. Everything's ruined." I kept my voice calm. "Well, Sarah, since you refused to pay for the event you asked me to organize, I had to cancel it. I couldn't let my contractors go unpaid." But what about the food?" Mark's voice came through faintly in the background. "Where's all the food we were supposed to have?" I couldn't help but smile a little. "Oh, the food? I donated it to a homeless shelter. At least someone will enjoy it." More screaming followed, but I'd had enough. I hung up the phone. About 10 minutes later, my phone rang again. My mother's voice came through shrill and angry. "Olivia, how could you do this to your sister? We raised you better than this." I felt a surge of frustration. "Mom, did Sarah tell you what she tried to do? She wanted me to pay for everything." "So what?" My father's voice boomed in the background. "You're doing well for yourself. You could have helped your sister out." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "Dad, we're talking about thousands of dollars here. I'm not made of money." "You're just being selfish," my mother snapped. "Your poor sister is heartbroken. Her special day is ruined because of your greed." I tried to stay calm, but their words were cutting deep. "Greed? I organized everything for free. I even paid cancellation fees out of my own pocket, but they weren't listening." My mother's next words felt like a slap in the face. "You know what I think?" she said, her voice cold. "I think you did this because you're jealous. You're almost 30, Olivia. No husband, no children. You couldn't stand to see her getting married while you have no one." I hung up the phone, my hand shaking. Tears stung my eyes, but I refused to let them fall. How dare they? How dare they twist this around and make me the villain? As I sat there trying to process everything that had happened, an idea struck me. If Sarah and Mark had promised to pay for everything, Where did that money go? They must have had it, right? I opened my laptop and drafted an email. In it, I detailed all the expenses I had incurred, including the cancellation fees. I demanded that Sarah and Mark reimburse me for every penny. If you don't pay, I wrote, my fingers flying over the keyboard, I'll be forced to take legal action. I hit send before I could second-guess myself. It was a bold move, I knew, but I was done being the family pushover. Within minutes, my phone was buzzing again. This time it was a barrage of text messages from Sarah and Mark. I steeled myself and opened them. The messages were a mix of threats and insults. Sarah called me every name in the book while Mark threatened to ruin me if I tried to take them to court. I saved screenshots of every message. If this did end up in court, I wanted all the evidence I could get. I also needed advice from someone who might have some insight into Sarah's fiancé and his family. That's when I remembered my Aunt Linda. She always seemed to know all the town gossip. Maybe she could tell me something about Mark and his family. I dialed her number, hoping she'd be willing to talk. Aunt Linda, it's Olivia. I need to ask you something about Sarah's fiancé. Aunt Linda's voice crackled through the phone, warm and familiar. Olivia, dear, it's been ages. What do you want to know about Mark? I took a deep breath. Well, I was wondering if you knew anything about his family, their financial situation. Oh, honey, Aunt Linda chuckled. You're asking the right person. The Thompsons, that's Mark's family, are quite well off. They own a chain of laundromats across the city, and word is they've got their fingers in some lucrative real estate deals, too. I felt my jaw drop. Wait, what? They're wealthy? Oh, yes, very much so, Aunt Linda continued, oblivious to my shock. Why, I heard they gave Mark a hefty sum to arrange that engagement party. $30,000 if the rumors are true. My mind was reeling. $30,000, and they had tried to make me pay for everything? After hanging up, I sat in stunned silence for a few minutes. Then determination set in. I knew what I had to do next. It took some digging, but I managed to find the address of Mark's parents. Without giving myself time to second-guess my decision, I got in my car and drove there. The house was impressive, a large, well-maintained property in one of the nicest neighborhoods in town. I took a deep breath and rang the doorbell. A middle-aged woman answered, her eyebrows raised in curiosity. Can I help you? Mrs. Thompson, I asked. When she nodded, I continued. I'm Olivia, Sarah's sister. I need to talk to you and your husband about Mark and the engagement party. She looked surprised but invited me in. Soon I was sitting in their living room, facing both of Mark's parents. Mr. and Mrs. Thompson, I began, my voice steadier than I felt. I'm here because I think you should know what happened with the engagement party. Over the next half hour, I explained everything. How Sarah had asked me to organize the party for free. How they had promised to pay for everything else but then refused. How I had been forced to cancel everything and pay the cancellation fees myself. As I spoke, I saw the shock and dismay growing on their faces. When I finished, there was a long silence. Finally, Mr. Thompson spoke, his voice tight with anger. We gave Mark $30,000 for this party. He told us everything was paid for. I felt a wave of relief wash over me. They believed me. Mr. Thompson left the room and returned a few minutes later with his checkbook. He wrote out a check for the full amount I had spent, plus a little extra for my trouble. It's the least we can do, he said, handing it to me. And don't worry, we'll be having a very serious conversation with Mark and Sarah about their behavior. As I left their house, I felt a mix of emotions, relief, vindication, but also sadness. This whole ordeal had exposed some ugly truths about my sister and her fiancé. On the drive home, my phone buzzed with texts. It was Sarah and Mark again, but this time their tone was very different. Gone were the threats and insults, replaced by panicked apologies and pleas for forgiveness. In the weeks that followed, I heard through the grapevine about the fallout from my visit to the Thompsons. Aunt Linda kept me updated. "You won't believe this, Olivia," she said during one of our phone calls. "Mark's parents have cut him off completely. No more monthly allowance, no financial support for the wedding, nothing." I couldn't help but feel a twinge of satisfaction. "Really? That's quite drastic." Aunt Linda's voice lowered conspiratorially. "Oh, honey, they were furious. Apparently they don't take kindly to being lied to and having their money misused. Can't say I blame them." I nodded, even though she couldn't see me. "What about the wedding? Is it still happening?" There was a pause, then Aunt Linda chuckled. "Well, that's the kicker. Without Mommy and Daddy's money, Mark and Sarah can't afford the lavish wedding they were planning. Last I heard, they postponed it indefinitely." My parents, predictably, didn't see it that way. They blamed me for Sarah's misfortune, conveniently forgetting that it was her own actions that had led to this situation. "You've ruined your sister's life," my mother said during one particularly heated phone call. "Are you happy now?" I took a deep breath, trying to stay calm. "Mom, Sarah and Mark tried to scam me out of thousands of dollars. They lied to everyone, including Mark's parents. How was that my fault?" However, it seemed like speaking with a brick wall. They believed that Sarah was perfect and that it was me, the villain, who had ruined her happiness. My life continued on despite the family turmoil. After the engagement party debacle, I threw myself back into my business and started to restore my clientele. Things began to improve gradually but steadily. I happened to run into Mr. Johnson, the man whose 50th birthday celebration I had to postpone in order to work on Sarah's engagement. One day, as I was heading out of a meeting with a new client, he cried out, "Olivia," with a smile. "How are you doing?" I had a guilty feeling. "I really apologize for abruptly canceling on you, Mr. Johnson. I acted in an unprofessional manner." I apologized, but he waved it off. "That is not necessary. Although your buddy Lisa did a fantastic job organizing the celebration, I must admit that I missed your individual touch." Something occurred to me. "Well, I would love the chance to make it up to you if you're planning any events in the future." Mr. Johnson has glittering eyes. In actuality, my company is about to celebrate its 25th anniversary. How would you choose to deal with that? I couldn't help but feel that things were finally improving as I left, contract in hand. Sure, I didn't have the best relationship with my family, but I still had my dignity, and my business was doing well. I was looking over seating arrangements one evening when I heard a loud knock on my flat door. I had no expectation of anyone. I carefully walked up to the door and peered through the spy hole. I was shocked to see Sarah and Mark there. In spite of my better judgment, I let myself in. "Why are you in this place?" Mark followed Sarah as she brashly pushed by me into the flat. "We are going to move in," she declared. Thinking I had misheard, I blinked. "Pardon me?" Sarah remarked, her tone accusing. "You heard me. We lost contact with Mark's parents because of you. Nothing, not even an allowance or cash for the wedding. We therefore made the decision to settle here." I had to admit, I laughed. Their plan's sheer audacity was nearly astounding. "You're not serious at all. You can't just decide to move in here. This is my house." With a contorted expression of rage, Mark stepped forward. "Oh, Olivia, you owe us." "Everything was damaged by you." My patience broke. "I have nothing to owe you. You recall trying to con me? Please exit my residence now." Sarah's farewell statement could be heard as I closed the door behind them. "You'll regret it." A odd frothy stuff ringed my flat door when I came home from a conference a few days later. It took me a minute to recognize what I was looking at. Foam for construction. Congealed all the way around my door, I was enraged. To replace my locks and remove the foam, I contacted a locksmith service. Mrs. Chen, my neighbor, came over to talk to me as I waited. "Olivia, my dear," she uttered, her expression showing anxiety. "I witnessed the events. If you need it, I can watch it on video." As expected, the footage from Mrs. Chen's security camera showed Sarah and Mark damaging my door. The video was crystal clear. Equipped with this proof, I proceeded directly to the police station. I asked for a restraining order against Sarah and Mark and filed a report for property damage. Although exhausting, the legal process was ultimately rewarding. For causing damage to my residence, the court fined Sarah and Mark and made them pay for the necessary repairs. More significantly, they were prohibited from approaching me from 500 feet away for the following 2 years. My parents were furious. Not at Sarah, mind you, but at me. When they learned, they were astounded that I had filed a lawsuit against my own sister. My mother bemoaned over the phone, "How could you do this to your family?" Taking a deep breath, I prepared myself. "No, Mother. How could you possibly stand with Sarah in light of everything that she has done? I'm tired of being used as a family scapegoat." I hung up and blocked their phones after that. Severing my family ties was painful, but I felt it was an essential step toward my personal health. I poured myself into work in the ensuing weeks. The anniversary celebration for Mr. Johnson was a huge success, bringing me a ton of new business and excellent feedback. I had a wave of calm as I stood at the rear of the exquisitely adorned hall and observed the visitors having a good time. Though I had lost my family, I had also earned something far more valuable: the ability to stand on my own 2 feet and respect for myself.